Welcome to Free Burn. This is Matt Ballard, your host. This is the podcast where we talk all things mental and behavioral health in the first responder community. Real life firefighters, police officers, EMTs and paramedics, clinicians, and doctors. It's time we have the real conversation and burn the stigma behind first responder mental health, one podcast at a time. And welcome back to Free Burn 2023, folks. This is Matt Ballard, and I am your host. Today we have a special guest on, Egan de los Cobos. Did I say that right? That's a mouthful,
yes, sir.
Brother.
Yeah.
He's 42 years old. Yeah, 42 years old. Started his fire service career at age 18 as a paid-on-call fireman, worked private EMS. He is actively in Santa Barbara County, correct?
Yes.
Santa Barbara County Fire Department for over 16 years. Active on his peer support team and critical incident stress management response through his department. He is also a certified health coach. He's passionate at helping others navigate stress, injuries, and physical health problems. Well, I want to get into more of that here in a bit, brother, and let you share some of that stuff. It's very interesting to me how you've connected some dots there in your personal life. So welcome, brother. Is there anything else that I missed that you want to add in?
No,
Gotta
just
be something.
super pumped to be here. And this stuff gets me up in the morning and keeps me going and just like yourself, far into the career. And this is kind of the stuff that's it's going to help me see the finish line. So
yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So no, just super pumped to be here and be part of it. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet, man. We got in contact through Instagram, right? Went through Freeburn, and I think you started following us. I started following y'all, or vice versa, however it was, and then it just transpired into this. I thought, man, I need to see if that guy wants to come on the podcast and share his story. Very interesting. So, tell us a little bit about Santa Barbara County. What's that fire department like there?
Santa Barbara County. So we're kind of the central coast of California area. It's a smaller department. However, we're the largest in the county because we're encompassing the whole county. So we're 16 stations.
Wow.
And so our call volume's around 20 something thousand roughly a year. So it's not terribly busy. We have busier stations than others, but we're more of a rural department. So we have like kind of in our northern county, it's not uncommon for us to have the next engine either be anywhere from 10 minutes, 15 minutes, all the way up to an hour.
Oh, wow.
So and one station's an outlier. Yeah. The next closest engine is a neighboring agency that's 30 minutes away. And then the next engine from our department's about an hour away. So that's kind of the dynamics we have in our department. And then on our southern county, we're kind of like a municipal department. We have lots of stations. It's tightly populated. That's kind of Santa Barbara, Goleta area. And so we have a different dynamic in the county. And we're an all-risk agency, so we have paramedics on every engine. And so we do everything from structural response, vehicle accidents. All of our engines carry jaws and everything, so we don't have designated trucks or anything. So we kind of do it all. And we got water rescue, we got bulldozers. We're a big wildland component. We're actually contracted with the state of California, and we're treated kind of like one of their own CAL FIRE units too. So we do a lot of wildland urban interface. We have lots of Type 3s, helicopter program. So we run lots of different things for our county as well as in the state.
Yeah, very interesting. How it kind of changes. I mean, I'm sure there's parts of Texas that have some of that, but a lot of differences between, fire departments in California. A lot of the same stuff, but a lot of differences too. But very interesting to hear about that. So yeah, man, that's cool. Tell us a little bit about your journey, man. Kind of how it started and where you're at today. Just go through your story and then, share that with us if you're willing to.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you mentioned, I started in the fire service at 18 years old. It's funny because I never really thought I was going to be a firefighter. My dad was a reserve police officer growing up, and I was always interested in that. But as my teenage years came, I didn't really think much of any kind of career personally. I was just kind of having fun. I like to surf. And then I graduated high school, and I'm like, I just want to make a bunch of money. So I'm like, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to learn how to be in business. So I did one semester city college, and I said, I hate this, and I can't do this anymore. So I got to get
Right.
outside and do something else. And so I actually I have two uncles. The one uncle I hit up, I knew he was a firefighter for a long time. He was LA City Fire, and a long time in his career. And I asked him, I'm like, hey, what's like a firefighter all about? And so he kind of explained to me kind of the path. And I'm like, well, that sounds interesting to me. I can be outside, and I know you can make a decent living on it. So I'm going to try it. So fell in love with that. Did EMT class. Got hired as a paid call firefighter at 18 years old. So I started really young, and did the academy, did all that stuff. And then I was in paramedic school by 19, 20 years old, and then was on the private ambulance, as well as a paid call firefighter at 21 years old. So I did all of that whole gamut. And throughout my entire life, health wise, I had no real health issues whatsoever. I had just some seasonal allergies. So all throughout my kind of early on career, I was a very healthy person. So then I got hired in Santa Barbara County Fire at 26 years old, and was on the department for about 7, 8 years before kind of things changed for me drastically. And so I was about 32. It was October, so October of 2013. So nearly 10 years ago. My son, who was 3 years old at the time, we were sitting in front of a coffee shop. And the way the parking lot comes in, there's cars that kind of do a horseshoe, kind of facing the coffee shop and loop around. And my son would always go and sit in this kind of gazebo area right in front, right near the parking lot. And it was day like any other. We were sitting inside this gazebo having my coffee. My son had his croissant, kind of our daily routine. And we're enclosed in this gazebo, and a car starts coming into the parking lot, and I could hear it kind of screeching, like hauling butt for whatever reason, but I couldn't see anything. So all I do is I can hear this thing, and all I hear is somebody like accelerate super loud, and then crash right through us. So I just heard this. I didn't see anything. So anyways, crash, car came in from the highway, came in the parking lot way too fast, crashed, and then went right through us and then back near the highway. So I got thrown one way, my son got thrown the other. And so once I got up, there's just debris in a car, and I can't find my son. And in that moment, I'm thinking every parent's worst nightmare had just occurred.
Sure.
That my son was killed. I can't find him. So I start digging through debris, and I picked up a bush, I remember, and then my son's lying face down, not moving, partially underneath the vehicle. I reach down and I pick him up, and in that moment, I'm thinking the worst things happen. He's not moving. I pick him up. He starts crying right away, instantly. And so a big kind of relief came over me
I bet.
just like we know in the first responder world, a crying kid's a good thing. That means they're breathing,
Yes.
right? So I
Yes, it
picked him
is.
up. He's crying hysterically. I'm okay with it. And I remember the driver was an elderly driver, was getting out of the vehicle while I'm holding my son and feeling pure rage and anger that this lady just went right through us. And in a moment in time, I'm like, what do I do? I'm like, my number one priority is to take care of my son.
Sure.
So I stood up, my legs were burning so bad. It was like excruciating pain. I thought they were broken, but I didn't have time to look to see. So I just started walking and hoping my legs weren't broken enough to get away from the vehicle. So I started walking, they weren't broken. So I was able to get over and sit down on a curb, and I just held my son, and he's crying hysterically. And the weirdest thing happens is because we're always on one side of it. We're responding to the call. We're thinking about things. When you're in that moment, there's no first responder in you whatsoever in that kind of moment, especially with your family. That was the kind of the weirdest feeling. So I'm holding my son, and I remember I think maybe a police officer showed up, and then fire engine. And obviously guys that I work with, including the captain of the day, was actually at my own station. He was working overtime at that station that day. Came up to me, and he's looking at me, and he's like, and he thought I was just there to help. He didn't realize it was me at first. And then I was basically staring blankly at him and just kind of nodded my head. And he knew right away that it was us. So it was weird because I had people coming up to me, but I couldn't get words out. And that was kind of the weirdest thing for me. to not be able to basically say anything. And that's when that, psychological shock that we can see on people, that was me.
Right.
And it was obviously the scariest thing ever. So I remember going to the back of the ambulance. And then I remember the EMT and the paramedic on the ambulance, or the EMT was like, "Oh, we're going to put your kid in a pediatric ward." I'm like, "The hell you will. He's staying right here and he's
Yep.
moving.
You're
I
not
don't
taking
care."
him
So
nowhere. Yep.
no, sorry. So put me on the gurney. So long story short, we got transported down to the trauma center because they weren't sure what kind of injuries we had, which is about 35 minutes away. And pure miracle, we were released later that day. I had just bumps and bruises all over my legs, some scratches, very minor injuries. Same with my son. He had a goose egg on his head, so they did a CT scan, and bruises all over his body. But no, he was fine. So we were literally released within probably 4 or 5 hours of the
That is
accident.
wild,
So
man.
pure
Yeah.
miracle. And so that was kind of, and I've always been a person who's looked at the bright side of everything, like things happen for a reason. And I literally remember like even going to the gym later that day just to try to clear my head about everything. And
Right.
like, I'm okay. And so I'm like, I'm a positive person. We're good. There's no physical
Yeah.
injuries, so I should be fine. So fast forward a little, it was within, I think it was 2 to 3 weeks after the accident. I noticed that my middle toes on both of my feet were swollen. They were almost the size of my big toe. And I'm like, what in the world is that? And so I'm like, well, maybe they got broken in the accident and I didn't realize it.
Hmm.
So I went got an X-ray, and they're like, no, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing broken. I'm like, oh, that's weird. But that event within a few weeks after the accident was kind of the start of my health decline, and that was the first inkling that I had of the autoimmune disease that was triggered by that accident. So we'll get into the physical part of that soon. But so like the mental health side of it, I knew it was a significant accident, and I was concerned about my son because
Hmm.
it was very traumatic for him. And so I
Sure.
remember I made an appointment to go see a therapist for him. Went into the therapist's office, and he explained to me that kids are very resilient, especially at that age. And depending on what
Right.
was going on, like he's going to be just fine. And then he said, "I'm concerned about you," and I'm like, "Why me?" Because I'm like, I'm fine. We lived. I mean, we lived through a miracle. I'm not hurt or anything. Like, I'm good. Like, I got a good attitude about this.
Hmm.
And so what he did, and then so he said that, and then he said, um, "I want you to do an exercise for me when we come back, and I want you to write a letter to your son as if he had died."
Mm.
And that sent me like pissed off, like whether it was it just pissed
Rightfully
me off.
so.
I
Sure.
walked out of the office and just thought to myself, what the hell is this guy think he's doing? Like, he's
Yeah.
alive, why should I focus on that? Like, and then looking back, I can kind of see where it was going, but long story short, it pissed me off. I didn't want to go back to that therapist. It wasn't for me. I walked out of the door and never went back.
Yeah.
So that was my only appointment that I did for my son initially, back then. So fast forward.
Hmm.
So I started having physical health symptoms. So the first symptom was my toes. They were swollen, like I said, the size of my big toes. And then plantar fasciitis started kicking in. I started having foot pain. And that was pretty much the whole first year after my accident. Just gnarly, gnarly plantar fasciitis. I went through all
That's
these different
crazy.
shoes,
Yeah.
insoles, and I'm like, what's going on? It felt like I was walking on like steak knives. It was that stabbing pain. You know how a lot of guys understand how plantar fasciitis feels. So I started having those symptoms. So that was for an entire year. And then after that year started my hip pain. So I started having really, really gnarly hip pain. And it would literally almost give out. Like you'd feel like you're walking normal. And then all of a sudden, like somebody just kicked your legs out from underneath, and I would almost fall over. And it got so bad that I went to UCLA, I think three
Hmm.
different times, and was almost going to have surgery on it too, because it was just the gap was in there was so narrow that they didn't really see any choice.
So
So,
what were
but
they?
that
What were
was
the doctors telling you?
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna get into that one.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so along with plantar fasciitis, hip pain, and then after I remember it was after about a year started my skin, which is psoriasis.
Mm-hmm.
And so it started with I just thought I had dandruff, so my skin started flaking. It was starting to get itchy. I just thought I had dandruff, so I started going down that road. Dandruff shampoo, and then started getting it in my groin area and other areas too. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
what is going on with my skin? And so mainly my head and stuff in my scalp. But so I tried different things. So these symptoms started happening. I went to the skin. I remember going to my primary. Well, first my joint pain. Once my hip pain started getting worse, that's when I got doctors involved. That's how I ended up in UCLA. But I went to like my primary care, and they're like, well, maybe you just got some like pain or issue, so we'll send you a chiropractor. So the chiropractor saw me, and he's like, well, I think something's wrong. So let's send you to an orthopedist. So I went to the orthopedist, and he does the MRI and all this stuff. And then they're like, that's when I got sent to UCLA. So the whole time they're telling me it's osteoarthritis, which is just normal aging arthritis. Not
Right.
and even though I have a family history, including my brother, who has autoimmune, I kept saying, "Hey, I think I have psoriatic arthritis, or rheumatoid, or one of those things." Because on this day, things drastically changed for me. Before this, I had never had these issues, so I don't think it's like an aging thing. It
And
seemed
that
like it was
day was the day
precipitated
of
out
the
of this.
accident, right?
Yeah, like it's like a line in the sand that things
Mm-hmm.
changed. It was,
Yep.
and so that was what kind of kept me on this thing of trying to explain to the doctors, and they kept dismissing me osteoarthritis. And then I'd see my dermatologist for my skin, and they were saying it's just seborrheic dermatitis, which is just a generic term for inflammation of the skin.
Right.
So I kept getting all these misdiagnoses, for lack of a better term, along the way. So I ended up seeing so I went to UCLA. They're about to do hip surgery on me. So just let me back up real quick. So let's see. It was plantar fasciitis, hip pain, skin issues. This all went on for greater than 3+ years, and we're talking as debilitating as me not being able to pick up my son, me calling
Yeah.
in sick for days on end because I can't physically like walk down the street. My hip would just give out, and I'm like, I don't want to be on a fire and all of a sudden my hip give out, or
Sure.
when I needed to help somebody on one of my brothers or sisters and I can't do it. Like,
Yep.
no, that's not fair to them or anything. And so there's a lot of the mental part of that that's on top of the physical. So you're so
Absolutely.
physically shot and hurt that, and then you got the mental thing of thinking about, oh, am I done? Can I not be a firefighter anymore? Can I not be there to help the citizens? Can I not be there to help my fellow firefighters?
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do for work? Like, there's so many things that are running through your head when you're physically shot, and then the mental aspect is a whole nother ball of wax. So,
I know exactly what you're
um,
talking
and
about there.
and not to mention the whole stigma with it too. So we're talking about it's funny to talk about timelines too, because here we are 2023 talking about mental health and changing the stigma, and this was only 9 years ago. And I know in like other departments just a couple of years ago, there you don't talk about this stuff at all. And
Mm-mm.
so back then, it's not saying that our department wouldn't embrace it, but it definitely was not a thing. So I was not sharing anything about my physical health, my mental health, or any of that kind of stuff at all. I was scared because I didn't know the repercussions if I said I can't work, or mentally,
Sure.
like, if I have post-traumatic stress, what are they going to think of me? What is my captain going to think of me? So there's so many things going in through my head. So, but I knew my number one thing was I have to get my physical health kind of to where I wanted it. So that the physical aspect was that my hip pain was like, it just reached a point to where that's why I ended up at UCLA. And then they
Mm-hmm.
told me about the surgery they wanted to do. The surgery entails them putting my leg in traction, cutting me open at the hip, going in and grinding down my femur head, and then putting it back
Mm-mm.
together. And I just was like, okay, is that really what I want to do right now? I know these doctors keep saying that it's just arthritis, but I don't. I feel in my gut that something's wrong. On this day, something was changed drastically for me, and my health's been in decline ever since. And then
How old were you at the time?
I
38,
was 34.
34,
So yeah,
and
this
already
was a
talking
couple years.
hip pain
Yeah,
surgery.
and so
Wow.
my physical health problems were going on for solid 3 years for nothing,
Yeah.
with no real answers. I was just going to one doctor to the next, and kind of accepting what they had to tell me, but it just didn't feel right in my gut of what in. And I told every last one of them, "Hey, could this accident be related to something physically?" And no one said yes.
Yeah.
And so, but I just felt once I hit that wall at UCLA that that's the surgery. And I'm like, is this what my life's come to have this surgery? That's not going to really fix anything. It's just going to prolong, um, postpone until I get a hip replacement. I'm like, is that where I'm at 34 years old? And I'm like, I
Right.
just don't feel right about it. So I kind of went back to the drawing board, and I'm like, I need to tear into, because I feel in my gut that something happened to me on this day. So I'm like, there's a traumatic event. Maybe it's stress, because I feel like that's something that's part of it. I had no clue about mental health and in the
Yeah.
elements of anything that I had learned. So I just kind of tore into things. I tore into immune health, gut health, and then how much the mind, body, brain connection
Sure.
attributes to things. So, and I'm like, and so that was my physical aspect. So when it comes to my mental health, I people would always say, oh, like nightmares and stuff that with PTSD, and that can be some. I just didn't sleep. I wouldn't fall asleep. I thought it was normal to just worry about my kids and everything else from like 9 o'clock till like 2 in the morning, and then
Sure.
sleep. So I'm like, well, I slept good for 4 hours, not knowing that that's a big problem. And
Yes, it
so I
is.
thought that was just normal, to worry about things in life. And then things started. I started noticing symptoms. One time my son, he was so he was still about 4 at the time. He was sitting up on a kind of a higher chair. We had this coffee table, and he fell off of it, maybe a couple feet. He's
Hmm.
most likely fine, but he fell and he started crying, and I reacted um, like I thought he was dying in front of me. Like it was
Sure.
this most physiological, overwhelming feeling that,
Hmm.
oh my God, I'm going to lose my son. And I picked him up, and I recognized that it was kind of a overreaction.
Sure.
But it was weird. It was overpowering, and I couldn't help myself. And so I noticed that was kind of weird. And then my temper. I started noticing getting super, super angry, but overcoming anger. And I'm
Hmm.
not that person. I'm one of the most mellowest people ever. And just the littlest things would send me through the roof. And I wanted to punch a wall. Like it was
Right.
crazy, the amount of like anger that was pent up. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? And that all that finally came to a head one time. I literally was my she was my fiance at the time. Like something happened stupid, and I literally threw a glass that hit a wall, and I
Hmm.
and I started crying right away. And I'm like, that's it. We're done here. That is not me. That just happened. It wasn't at her or anything like that. It was just anger that I expressed for whatever reason. And I'm
Sure.
like, I scared the crap out of myself. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is done. And so I'm like, I got to figure out what's going on. So so I made an appointment with a local therapist that I knew, and explained to her, hey, I'm like, I had an accident here, and these are kind of my symptoms, and I'm like, I don't know what to make of it. And she's like, you have PTSD. I'm like, what? I said, PTSD. I said, isn't that for like veterans and people who have been
Sure.
in war and seen maimed bodies, like their own brothers die? And she's like, yes. She's all, but what you went through and what you're explaining to me is PTSD. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I didn't feel like that didn't wasn't to any level to what a military vet and
Right.
what those overseas go through. So
Hmm.
I didn't think that was a proper diagnosis for me. I just didn't have the clue. So she
Right.
explained to me that she can help, and there's something what's called EMDR that she wants to do and walk me through. And so that's what I did. And so EMDR, like as you know, is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And
Yes.
for lack of a better term, it's kind of voodoo. Like it's
Witchcraft,
just
man.
Exactly. That's exactly how it's hard to
It's
explain,
weird.
but very weird, but it helped. It helped tremendously. And that was kind of the pivotal like turning point for me to
Hmm.
begin my healing journey and to kind of push me to where I am now. So what EMDR did, just to explain for me what it did. So basically you when you go through a traumatic event, your brain forms or processes it in a certain way. And when it's not fully developed, that's when the nightmares, that's when stress comes involved and it affects
Yep.
your health and all these other things because your brain's constantly trying to process this trauma that you didn't process to begin with. And it's not
Hmm.
your fault. It's how your brain visualizes it and it's trying to do its job, but sometimes it's just not doing it in the most effective way. So
Yeah.
we kind of walk through the trauma, but in a very safe way. So
Yes.
it's not like you're reliving it per se, and it's taking it down that notch. And it was weird because um, I had an image in my head when I went through the event.
Hmm.
I was reliving in my brain of basically seeing my son dead.
Yep.
That was the image in my head that I was constantly reliving.
Sure.
And what EMDR did was help me basically reframe that. Now, when I think of the accident, all I do is picture my 3-year-old son tapping me on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, Dad, I'm here. I'm here. I'm good. I'm good." And that's kind of the best way I can explain what EMDR did for me.
Yeah. Yep.
Reframe the bad shit and put it into a better memory to help you process that
Hmm.
and make you move on. It doesn't make you don't forget traumatic events. You
No.
just don't, and that's okay. We're not
Yeah.
we're supposed to we're normal. We're human, and that's normal for us. We just need to be able to get on the other side of that and process it
Yep.
in the right and healthy way.
One hundred
So
percent.
the EMDR was invaluable, and that was the tipping point for me to get my health back in line. So
Yeah.
that that dumped me forward into really tearing into like gut health, immune health, what are triggers for autoimmune disease, and then as simple as your diet and exercise, stress reduction stuff. So I really started tearing into that and really hyper focused on that. Got into different supplementation, and that was kind of the obviously the tipping point to really drive my health forward from start to finish. So after the EMDR, getting into there and really focusing on what I needed to do to heal myself. Obviously, there was a lot of trial and error because there wasn't as much
Sure.
like I could think of out there back then. But it took me about 6 months of really focused effort, and I noticed my skin starting to get better without steroids, without any kind of medication. And that
Hmm.
was something for me that obviously I, as a paramedic, we're practicing Western medicine, and medications are fantastic in regards, but for me, my own personal journey, I didn't feel the risk versus gain to go on the medications that they wanted me, they
Right.
recommended for me. A lot of them for autoimmune are used for cancer patients,
Mm.
as well as some of them can actually lead to other things. But it depends because medications can help you take that edge off to be able
Sure.
to start your health journey. Because if you're at such a low point, of course, try everything you can to get you
Yeah.
out to be able to push your health forward. So I'm
Hmm.
not anti-medication at all. It's just whatever somebody feels is what's right for them, and
Sure.
depending on where we're at. So I just
Yep.
never felt like I needed to get the point. But guess what I did do? I took ibuprofen like crazy to get me out of
Right.
bed some days. I took NyQuil to help me sleep, which isn't healthy at
Hmm.
all. I took NyQuil
Yep.
the night before I got married because I couldn't,
Right.
like, that was the biggest thing. Like it was like, yeah, that was bad. But it's just coping mechanisms that you do.
Sure.
And so after going through all that journey, I started piecing things together of what kind of worked for me. So 6 months started noticing some healing in my skin, which takes like the longest I feel. And then just those tweaking those things and understanding what diet changes, hydration and stuff has to do with my joints. And then for me, so my number one triggers are Lack of sleep and stress are kind of my big triggers when it comes to things. And everyone's different. So my diet
Right.
was always decent, decent enough, but those are kind of my big things. So, and then within a year of really focused effort, I was back to running, and now I run half marathons. I just
Wow.
went for a 4 mile run yesterday in 100-degree heat. Like I liked doing that. It's like, but almost, about 8, 9 years ago, I could barely walk down the street. So
Yeah.
I've come a long way with everything, and it's just, and then so throughout my whole healing journey, I started being not embarrassed about it, like just trying to share. Like people would ask, like if they saw something with my skin or like saw my journey on social media, that and say, hey, like I've been dealing with this too. I'm like, what? Like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought you were, like physical stud and like had no issues,
Sure.
and people start coming out and they're like, oh, I struggle with it. I'm like, what, really? So I started just, and then people ask for like what I'm doing. So I'm like, I'll share what I'm doing. And then the more I started talking with people and engaging in helping people with their own journey, I'm like, I actually like this. This is real similar to what I do in the fire service,
Yes.
but on a more personal level.
Hmm.
In the fire service, we're there, we show up, we help somebody try to make a difference in, 20, 30 minutes, depending on what the call is.
Right.
And then we put them off to the hospital or do whatever. And now, like, I feel like I can have such an impact on somebody's own personal life through health coaching. So I
Yep.
started like figuring out like what can I do with this. So and I'm like, I think health coaching. So I looked into what health coaching is, and I'm like, I really like that. It's just talking to people, helping with their journey, sharing what I did, and hopefully it's going to work for them too, but helping them navigate what it is. And so I went and became a certified health coach through the National Society of Health Coaches, which is kind of geared towards Western medicine trained people, doctors, nurses, PAs, chiropractors, etc.
Right.
And then it's based within basically for motivational interviewing is kind of the premise behind that, and
Hmm.
that's been used obviously for drug substance abuse kind of counseling, and then
Right.
they've basically moved that over into health, and they've noticed just as spectacular results. So it's kind of on that premise, but
That's awesome,
and I
dude.
really love that because I get to form a partnership with somebody. There's a lot of similarities. The more I talk to people when it comes to their journey, whether it's with doctors, whether it's dealing with different medications, stress is such a huge
Yep.
thing. It's incredible to talk to people that haven't it's so easy for me to talk to people and kind of see the writing on the wall of their journey.
Hmm.
But I remember being in that same thing, like, oh, I'm good. Like that was a bad event, sure, but I've moved on. But it's like, but guess what? Your brain has not, and it has not
Yep.
processed that stuff. And there's a fantastic book too by Bessel van der Kolk. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's a fantastic
I've heard
book
of
when
that
it
book.
comes
I need to
to
read it.
okay. Yeah, and it's amazing to see the manifestations in your physical body of your mind. And
Yep.
a big thing for me that I learned along the way too is that the mind and the body they're connected completely, physically connected. So there's no mental health versus physical health. It's all in one. Mental health is physical health. Physical health
Hmm.
is mental health, and on a physiological and biological level, it is. So
Right.
that's something that has been forefront for me moving forward. So I've been health coaching now for the last couple of years, 2 years, 2021. Been
Hmm.
doing that, and I only take a handful of clients every month because I want to give the most to my clients,
Sure.
and not and I'm not here just to make a quick buck or anything. It's to get people to where they need to go, to push
Yeah.
their health forward,
Sure.
and I just truly enjoy it. And the whole mental health aspect is huge when it comes to the first responder community, and people
Hmm.
like yourself bringing that
Yep.
to the forefront is huge, and a cultural shift. So along my journey, there was a cultural shift in my department as well. So when I started my journey, like I said, there was a stress. Um, the component of my stress injury that I sustained, like I didn't talk about, obviously, is very embarrassed about. And
Yeah.
so I started going through my journey, and then these classes started popping up about like CISM, through ICISF, and the idea of a peer support program. So, and that was back in I think 2016 is when I took my first class, and I was still in my kind of journey. I just done EMDR and
Right.
was still there, and I started taking those classes. But kind of like yourself, there was no there wasn't anything really out there yet. There was a couple of us on the department that were kind of like, hey, I think this could be something, and we got basically saying, oh, thanks, but no thanks. We don't have money for that. Is what a
Yeah.
lot part of it started happening, and then culturally we had a shift in our county in 2018. So we had the January debris flow Montecito that went through Montecito, and actually a huge tragedy in that community. But what happened after that was something that never happened before. We had basically a CMB after that, just kind of, it's not really a debriefing, but basically all the engines, everyone on duty and off duty came and met, and we talked about mental health. We talked
Yep.
about the impacts of a stressful event, what it could look
I've been
like.
through ISF, so I know what you're talking about.
Great.
Yep.
Exactly. And so that was the first time that they got everybody in the same area under the same tent and said, hey, we're done dealing with this. This was a tragic thing, and things are going to look different from now on, which was awesome. So, but obviously culturally, as you can tell in the department, it wasn't as well received. Even
Sure.
I was stoked about it because I was going through my own journey, but the grumblings in the station were like, why would I need to do this? I wasn't part of it. I'm going to be exposed and all this stuff. And it was ironic because we always pride ourselves on being a team, looking out for our brother and sister.
Sure.
And I remember questioning somebody about it, saying like, oh, why do, and I'm like, what if this isn't about you? What if it's about somebody next to you who maybe needs help and they need this, and maybe you can learn something to help them?
Amen,
And
brother.
they kind of looked at me and thought to themselves, like, maybe you're right. And so that was a huge cultural shift in our area that kind of pushed peer support forward, which was in light of a tragic event, but it helped
Yeah.
push us light years ahead. And so that was kind of the pivotal point when it started our peer support. And so that's when we started getting a little bit of funding. It's not much, but we started getting our program going. And now been able to be a part of it for the last 3 years now too, and so it's great. It's growing legs, and it's starting to be talked about in the station on a
Yep.
more accepted level by leaps and bounds. Within just the last, COVID really accelerated things too,
Sure.
which was interesting. So that our we have the privilege of having a nonprofit that does tons of fundraising to allow our first responders in the county to attend free counseling sessions. So it's completely invaluable, and it's 100% donation based. So we have this wonderful resource at our disposal for our members. All they have to do is call.
If you want to mention that name, you absolutely sure can.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, 1805 is our nonprofit in the county, 1805 SB, I believe, on Instagram. And it's 100% nonprofit, and they support our first responders on so many levels. It's amazing.
Check
And
them
so
out,
we're
folks.
super thankful. And it's just huge to have that resource, because that's such a huge stumbling block for so many programs and peer support to not have that follow up. We can do it's peer support is kind of the crux of to be able to get that conversation, change that stigma, get to those trainings.
Yes,
But
it
we
is.
need to have that transition to a higher level. We're not counselors. We're not therapists. We're not trying to pretend we are. And
Nope.
so we're basically kind of that bridge to bridge that gap to get people to the resources that they need to. And so it's been
100%.
huge.
Yep.
So we've had changes in our county of how it's been funded, but it's running very good right now, and we're doing our best to support our members. And that's one thing that I've been passionate about too, is I feel like so peer support's amazing, having 1-805 in our therapy sessions available to our members is great. I just feel that there's a gap, and I think that's where resilience kind of comes in, and that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
been my focus, is
Yep.
trying to, like they say, basically the easiest way to fight a fire is to prevent it in the first place. And I
Sure.
think that's the best way to look at the mental health and physical health too.
Yep.
Firefighters were naturally resilient anyways. I mean, that's just
Mm-hmm.
who we are. Type A personalities.
Sure.
We're the ones who give help. We don't want to be the ones that accept help, which is okay to a certain extent. But we like to solve problems, and by allowing to give our guys the tools that they can basically do self-care, figure out how
Mm-hmm.
things work for them, I think is invaluable, because there was a lot of things that I could have done differently along the way, that might have helped me accelerate my healing process in finding
Right.
what I needed to do too.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I've been focusing on. So I got instructor for like a stress first aid, which is kind of a federal program that was developed by
Mm-hmm.
the National Center of PTSD. It was by the Navy, so they've been doing that along the way. And I've been starting to roll that out for our department, and I'm going to start to roll it out hopefully countywide too. It's just another tool in the toolbox of
Yep.
things, and a framework of basically smashing that stigma, identifying things, and identifying early signs and symptoms
Yes.
of post-traumatic stress before those little fires turn into big fires, because we always want
Sure.
to put them out when we're small.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the goal when it comes to this stuff, because
That's
it
that's how
affects.
Freeburn. That's how Freeburn
Okay.
got kicked off. Yep. It's going. It was made. It wasn't even Freeburn at the time, but that's why we started doing what we were doing, is going out and talking to fire departments wherever they'd let us come in and speak on mental health awareness. We're there, and then it kind of is morphing into this podcast now. So very similar.
That's
That's
amazing.
awesome. Yeah.
Great. I'd
Yep.
love to hear that stuff too, because that's exactly what you're doing here, what we're doing, and just opening that door for that conversation
Mm-hmm.
is literally a huge chunk of it. Um, I think the hardest part of this entire journey, and the entire um, just where I'm at today, was accepting the fact that I needed help and
Mm-hmm.
asking for it. That was,
Yep.
for whatever reason, there's lots of them out there: pride, stigma, fear of the unknown. But once I kind of went over that point and said, this is out of my hands, I need help, was the best
Yeah.
decision I've ever made. In understanding that there's people out there that are trained that can help you. I promise you.
Sure.
And if it's not the first person, it's the second or the third person too. And just like
Yep.
I learned, my first therapist he probably could have been the best therapist that are out there, like for somebody else. But guess what? It didn't align with me. And that's why I
Mm-mm.
walked out the door. But that was my first inkling. And I just wrote it off like, oh, all therapists are this way. And that
Yeah.
was a huge mistake that I made. And I encourage anybody to, like, if just because one appointment went bad, find somebody else. You'll find
Yeah.
that person, and
And you'll
it's
know when you
imperative.
find that person. You'll know it.
Absolutely, and it's
Yeah.
imperative you find that one that echoes with you, because that's where the difference is going to be made.
Absolutely. Yep. Same for me, man. I mean, I've been through this twice. You probably heard this my first podcast, my story, but the first time I went through maybe 4 counseling sessions, and it was what it was, right? And then didn't really deal with the core issues at hand that I was dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Go through it the second time and go back, started doing EMDR therapy, and it was life-changing for me. Found the right counselor, and it changed my life. So
Incredible.
it can't happen. You got 2 guys standing here
Absolutely.
that can show you that it can't happen.
100%.
So if there's somebody out there that's struggling with that, just know, don't give up. Get to the right people, get to the right resources, and get help.
Mm-hmm.
Egan's story is awesome. So, yeah, continue on, brother. What else you got?
Good. Now, you were just mentioning too about the resources out there, and there's more growing by the day, and it's really impressive to see.
Sure.
Just like we connected too, social media.
Yep.
It's funny how those algorithms work, right? You start liking or whatever, and you start pushing all the connections together. It's pretty incredible too. So
Yeah, it is.
there's lots of things out there that are popping up day after day, which is it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And there's federal resources. I think like SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association, they have free training for
Hmm.
first responders online. I think it was even part of my target solutions I had to do a little while ago, which was great. And I'm
Was
like,
it?
this is great.
Yeah.
Let's keep this stuff going. There's,
The International
several
Association of Firefighters. They have
IAFF.
tons
It's
of resources,
perfect.
training
And
resources
I remember you mentioned on your podcast too of their webinars. They got, I think, 2 to 3 webinars every
all the
month. And
time.
I'm like you, I'm popping on. So I'm going to look for your name next time in there in
I'll
the
be looking
chat.
for you too. Yep.
Yeah, no,
That's pretty
it's
cool.
fantastic. Yeah, there's lots of information out there, and there's growing lots of resources too. California, we're pretty fortunate that we have a lot of growing peer support teams. We're starting to
Yeah.
get interconnected for even incident management teams.
Hmm.
So same with the feds and stuff they have. That's part of the red card now too. Is CISM on there, and so they're deploying for
Really?
incidents. Yeah, and so that's something that I'm part of, and our team is starting to go. So we'll go to neighboring agencies and be able to assist them too. So this
Yeah.
network is slowly growing, and it's kind of like the fire service in general too. It's kind of a big thing, but it gets
Hmm.
smaller. The more people you talk to, you're like, oh, so and so, I know someone who works there, and then
Yep.
peer support's kind of working the same way, and you can get connections with people and get you plugged in with different resources.
Sure.
So that's growing on lots of levels too. We have out here too the PSPSA, which is peer support um, public safety peer support association too, and they're huge and pivotal and offer training and offer a conference every year, and where
Hmm.
people come in from all over the country in San Diego every year too to network, get together, share resources.
That's
San Diego
awesome, dude.
City police and fire, they're kind of one of the poster child for when it comes to mental health. They have lots of
Really?
programs that are pretty incredible. Have how they treat those, and their whole goal is to basically accept them treat right away and get them back to duty. It's not
Hmm.
trying to delay anything. There's no there's some levels depending on the level. If there's nothing serious involved, basically kind of no questions asked, time off, back to duty, and that's the whole goal is to get them. So the old school thought of like thinking that that just because you're having post traumatic stress PTSD that you're it, turn in your badge, your
Yeah.
gun,
No
that's
more of
it,
that.
no more of that crap, right?
Yeah.
So it's treating it. It's so there's a kind of a cultural change. A lot of people don't hear PTSD, but a lot of people are also embracing the word PTSI. So
Injuries.
PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, versus PTSI, which is an injury,
Yep.
and that's exactly what it is.
Hmm.
And so we're trying to change. When we talk about stigma, that's one of those things too. And because it is a physical injury that happens to your brain. So
Yep.
when we talk about the brain and what post-traumatic stress and PTSD is, there's 3 main parts that encompass that, and it's your amygdala, your hippocampus, and your prefrontal cortex. So
Yeah.
amygdala, hippocampus are kind of your limbic system, right?
Yep.
Amygdala is your alarm center, and it's great. You need it. It's there for your survival. But what happens is that little guy gets bigger every time, and the
That's right.
hippocampus, which tied to your memory, also shrinks. So that's why when you're stressed, you have trouble recalling things, remembering things. You kind of have a
Hmm.
brain fog.
Yep.
And but what happens is this amygdala, the more that starts to fire, you start being hyper aroused, and in that kind of fight or flight state, they really
Hmm.
start talking and liking to be together. So it's harder to break that connection when you're in that state.
Yep.
And so in the prefrontal cortex, which is our human brain, it allows us to have emotional regulation,
Yep.
make rash decisions. That thing starts to shut down, which is not a good thing. So now we
Mm-mm.
have a hyper, like a hyper aware, like fight or flight state, and one
Sure.
that doesn't want to think correctly. So now we start opening up the doors to lots of things,
Hmm.
alcohol, drug abuse, um, um, just all the other hosts, gambling, you name it. So
You
there's
name
lots
it.
of different things. And so that's when we start having that breakdown in the communication in our brain. So
Sure.
and that's what EMDR can help to break that and to start
Yep.
engaging that prefrontal cortex can do that too. And there's other ways that we can engage that prefrontal cortex too. And one of the fastest ways to do that is breathing. So
Hmm.
box breathing, I'm sure people have talked about too. So,
Yep.
and there's in meditation, mindfulness, those kinds of things are all engaging to. So we have our sympathetic nervous system, right? As paramedic, we remember this, and then the
Oh yeah.
sympathetic and then the parasympathetic, and that's the balance. So
Sure it
we're
is.
going back to the first week of paramedic school here,
Yep.
and when we're in that heightened state, we're drinking caffeine all day, we're going on runs all day, we're
Hmm.
maybe some people are having nicotine all day. We're eating sugar. We're all this thing. That's all engaging the sympathetic nervous system. Oh, did I mention death and trauma and stress too? That's all over here, right? And
Yep.
so but the parasympathetic is getting override, and that's when we start getting out of balance too.
You
So we need to be able
explain it
to,
way better than I do. Way better than I do. So I'm glad you did that. And
yeah.
keep going, brother.
No worries, man. So I mean, that's been that's and when it comes to that um, imbalance that we have
Yep.
is that's what's tied to our physical health problems. So when we're in that or the sympathetic state, so our fight or flight state, we're
Hmm.
dumping what? Adrenaline. We're dumping cortisol, which is our stress hormone. What does
Yep.
cortisol do? It starts increasing our cholesterol, increases our heart rate. It starts dumping sugar into our system, so we start getting things like pre-diabetes,
Hmm.
and all that stuff starts tying down. And what happens in that sympathetic state is we don't need to fight off a cold when we're running from a saber-toothed tiger, right? So what
Yep.
do? We push down our immune system, and so that's
Hmm.
why your immune system gets suppressed. And then you stack, let's see, not a very good sleep schedule on top of that, and run after run, you start going into one state, and this other state starts plummeting, and that's when things
Hmm.
get off course. Post-traumatic stress injury, immune health, diabetes, high cholesterol, all those things play a huge factor into into our physical health and mental health. But remember, they're related. So I don't make a distinction between the two because you need one without the other. And
Yeah.
so those are things just to kind of be aware of. It's kind of, especially when it comes to autoimmune, can make the same correlation. It's like, can we go drive down the road? We can we can drive down the road, first, second gear, fine, right? We can do that. But do you want to
Rev it up.
drive down the freeway in second gear for a long period
Yep.
of time?
Hmm.
Hell no, you don't. Those RPMs are
Mm-mm.
going to be pegged, and you're going to blow up your motor. You're going to do the
Yeah.
same thing with your health in your brain if you're constantly in that accelerated state.
Yep.
So we have to balance that and just be cognizant of those things that are pegging us and things that bring us down. Because even if you had the most perfect diet, you got sleep every day, you did everything you could possibly do. As a firefighter, first responder, we're still dealing with critical calls.
Sure.
We still have to juggle the family work life balance. I mean,
Yep.
that's a struggle in itself, right?
Hmm.
Raising kids, we have all these things, and then in the emergency services world, we have even more critical incidents. So the average first responder sees 188 critical incidents in their course of their career. The
Yeah.
average person sees 2 to 3. So
That puts
we
it in
are,
perspective,
a couple
folks.
hundred times more likely to develop these injuries. So yeah, it's a very, and that's just an average statistic. Some people could see quite a bit more,
Sure.
and so we need to be more cognizant of the average person when it comes to seeing that, checking in with ourselves and having that
Yeah.
balance of understanding that too.
That's
So
where
obviously,
resiliency
yeah,
comes in.
absolutely, 100% too.
Yep.
So.
Awesome, brother. I mean,
Mhm.
I couldn't have said that any better. I can't explain it like you just did. So that's awesome, dude. Yeah. Great story, man. I'm glad you came on. I mean, that needed to be told and that needed to be heard. Just the whole thing, right? You just explained 90% of the fire service and what we
Yeah.
deal with in a
Yeah. And
scientific way, but not so
well, thank
scientific way. Right.
I know. I try. I like that side of it, but I'm a very simple paramedic. I'm really bad with drug dosages, so I carry my
I'm the same way.
syringes. I don't have to keep that, so I don't have to do a lot of math.
Right.
But the whole reason for that is like, when I'm talking about this, it's going on 10 years of my journey in October with all this
Yeah.
stuff too. So it's been a long time coming. And so, I'm constantly learning, and I love this. I truly love this stuff, and trying to,
Yep.
pass this on and what I've learned in doing trainings, because I want more than anything to give the tools. If I have tools to give to somebody, I want them to have them to make their own decision, so
Yep.
they can avoid pitfalls that I make, because I made lots of mistakes. We could be on here all day talk about all the mistakes I've made in my life, but like we're talking about this one narrow window, I want somebody to say, hey, yeah, don't avoid this, look out for this, and here's some tools. So,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the big driving factor for all this. And I'm, a little over halfway through my career, and this is something I want to pursue throughout the remainder of my career, and maybe beyond. We'll see what things look like too. But it's obviously, the statistics, we look at them all the time, of suicide versus
Sure.
line of duty deaths. So, and that's always a big driving factor to me. I just looked on it today, and obviously
Yep.
the stats are still skewed because it's not a mandated reporting yet. Things are changing.
Where do you
But
get your stats at?
so, well, there's a couple. The one, Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance, is kind of
That's
the
exactly where I was
one
going.
from Jeff
That's
Dill.
where I get mine. Yep.
Okay. Yep. And so he's one who's actually verifying it too. There's other resources out there, and some of them are a little bit skewed, but until it becomes a mandated reporting, this is
Yeah.
kind of what we have to deal with. But the statistics are always on par, with
I think
right
he
around
says
the same amount as line of duty deaths. And
Yep.
that shouldn't happen. It should be a mute point. It shouldn't be an issue at all. And
On
something
Jeff
else I
Dill's
kind of,
website, I think it says 60% accuracy, right, on the reporting,
okay,
and at 60%, it's still high, right?
still high.
And
Exactly.
that's the ones that we know about. So
At 100%.
there's definitely an issue there that needs to be dealt with.
Mhm.
So, and that's
And
why
we've
we're
had
here today.
Absolutely. And like, we can vouch for that reporting to some degree, because we've had, or we've lost other past firefighters in our own local area that wouldn't be deemed suicide, but for all intents and purposes, we knew what was going on there. But it wasn't reported at all.
Yeah.
And that's for us to learn from and move forward.
We know the numbers are higher.
Yes, 100%. And obviously things like this, podcasts, and just talking in the station is how we start to get out in front of everything.
Yeah.
And so talking about that, in a component that we talked about, and why we're here too, is, the stress injury. And when you even factor in line of duty deaths, on top of the suicides, if you look at that statistically, as of today, a third of them were heart attack, stroke, and other things that are correlated scientifically to stress. And so that's such a huge thing. So if you factor a third of all the line of duty deaths and all the suicides to stress, you're talking a vast majority are related to that mental stress that we go through on so many levels. 100%.
It all correlates. So that's awesome, brother. Thank you for coming on. You got anything else before we start wrapping?
I just want to say again, thanks so much for having me on today. I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts going forward, and it takes a lot of heart to do what you do, and it's it's scary to some degree. But I appreciate what you're doing, just throwing this out there and basically kind of saying, hey, we're done here. We need to talk. We need to change this stigma. There's resources out here, and these are people that can help. And we need to give our best to all the guys coming into our department as well, and those who want to retire healthy too, because that's a big part of it. We'd hate to work 33 years in our career and It's kind of like guys in our department getting ready to retire. They want to take care of their knees, their shoulders, their hips, whatever it is, have the surgeries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. You don't want to leave unhealthy. We do the same thing for that mental health. You got to offload all that crap,
Yep.
deal with it, so you can have that healthy retirement. Because I'd hate to see somebody retire. They got that motorhome, and then they never leaves the driveway because they're stuck dealing with all of the stresses and stuff that they didn't do with along the career.
Yeah,
We
it's
we
not just going to
pay.
go away. It's not just going to leave.
Yes, exactly. So we need to offload that. I've had the privilege of going to a local inpatient treatment center just as a
Mm-hmm.
guest, obviously, to look at the facility, which is phenomenal, and ask questions about kind of who they see, and they they almost always have some people that are actually in retirement dealing with things like the
Yeah.
Oklahoma City bomb, 9/11. We're talking things that happened 30, 40 years ago, and they
Mm-hmm.
haven't offloaded that. And I don't, in our retirement window, even though sometimes firefighters get to retire early, it's still a very narrow window. So don't work for
Yes.
33 years and think that you're going to have these great 10 years in retirement
Mm-hmm.
if you don't offload some of this stuff too.
Sure.
So you don't want to be a prisoner in your own mind of all the stuff that you didn't deal with along the way.
Yep.
So it's such a big deal. So just thank you so much for like having me and doing what you do, because people like yourself and myself that are just talking about this openly and love it and really want
Yep.
to make a change is how we're going to make these changes happen for
Yeah.
everybody going forward.
Well, it's guys like you that motivate me, man. It's like I want to hear from people like you that have been through those struggles and now are on the other side of it, right? And what you did to get through those struggles. Like I said, they're not going to go away. We just learn to deal with them in better ways, right? Stuff
Mm-hmm.
those things. You don't really even stuff them down. You just kind of put them in a file cabinet. They're there, but they're not gone. We just know how to deal with them in a better way now, so to speak, through resiliency and
Absolutely.
health and everything else. So, real quick, your website.
So my website is firstwellnesshealth.com. You can get a hold of me there. I also have links to social media there. I also have free mental health resources that I'm trying to change and update as well too. So there's
Yep.
free resources there too. And look forward to rolling out some other free like trainings and online health things related to first responders as well too. You can also find me on YouTube, First Wellness Health Coach there, and Instagram is Egan First Wellness. You can hook up with me there, and that's a link to everything else too. So Instagram is an easy way to get a hold of me as well too. Feel free to
Yeah, we'll share
message
your link.
me. Yeah, message me, reach out. Well, I love to hear other people's stories, and if there's any questions that I can answer when it comes to this stuff, we all learn together. I learn just as much from everybody else. Like, there's not for one second I think I'm in any expert. I just went through my own journey. I have some
Yep.
things that I've learned, and I want to share that. But every time I turn around, I learn something new. Just like from you, Matt, just hearing your story and just hearing your aspect of it, I learn something new all the time, and it's awesome. And that's how
Well,
we
that's
do
what
that.
it's
That's just
about. Yeah.
absolutely just like in the station when we do trainings, right? So we always learn something at the end of it, and we're like, oh yeah, that's right, or it's a reminding session too, and that's what a
Yep.
lot of this is. It's nothing new. A lot of it, some of it is, but a lot of it's reminding of like, oh, we need to prioritize our sleep. We need to prioritize, stress reduction. Embrace being
100%.
able to get that balance of your nervous system down,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that stuff too. So,
Yeah.
yeah, feel free to reach out,
Yeah,
and I
man.
would love to hear from people.
Stay in touch for sure. Just another resource, right? I mean, use me as a resource
100%.
if you need me. I'll use you as a resource if you're good with that. And
Absolutely, Matt.
anybody out there, same thing. You got two more resources right here, and that's what it's about: the resources, right? Getting to the right people in the right amount of time to get healthy. So, with that being said, I always mention towards the end of the show 988. If there's anybody out there that is in crisis or having suicidal thoughts or whatever, reach out to 988. If you can't do that, reach out to one of us, freeburn2023@gmail.com. Get in touch with us through our social media platforms. We will do what we can do, everything possible, that we can do to get you to the right resources. If we don't know, we'll find somebody that knows. So please reach out. With that being said, thank you very much, brother, for coming on. I was super excited about this interview, and it was everything that I thought it was going to be. I learned a ton today. So good stuff, man.
Great. No, thank you, Matt. I
We'll
learned a
touch
great
base
deal
again. Yeah, we'll touch base again, and hopefully have you back on in the future and just check in with you and just see what's going on with you. If you're good with that. And
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Egan. I appreciate you, brother.
All right. Thank you, sir.
All right, man. We'll touch base again. Thank you very much.
Sounds good.
Thank you, folks. See you on the next burn. Thanks for tuning in to the Free Burn 2023 podcast. If you or somebody you know is in crisis, reach out to the Suicide Crisis Lifeline at 988. Or if you're looking for counseling resources, contact us at freeburn2023@gmail.com. We'll do our best to get you to where you need to be. Let's keep burning that stigma, one podcast at a time.